Good afternoon.
Hi,
How are you?
good to see you. Yeah, great. Thank you.
It is it is so great to see you again. I hope you are well.
Yes, I'm well, and same to you.
Thank you so much. So may I ask you please tell us your name?
Yes, my name is Christopher Argyris.
Thank you so much. And will you share a little bit about yourself? Anything you feel comfortable sharing?
Yes, so I'm originally from Oakland, California. Grew up in California. I live for the last 5 years in London, and I moved here in 2015 to do a PhD in international law. My career, I started out as a journalist. Then I moved back to DC, and then got a master's in international relations and started working with the State Department, focusing on the Middle East, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, all of the hot spots. And yeah, since then, I've just basically focused on foreign policy, international relations, and now in London.
Excellent.
Enjoying life as much as possible, being having been in a pandemic lockdown for the last year, but spring is here. We're starting to emerge. I've been got the first shot of AstraZeneca, so maybe some sure the pandemic will come up in some perspective. But yeah, I'm happy to provide my perspective of being an expat abroad during an interesting time, and you know, it's
What
great to
made
talk
you
with you.
what made you decide to go to London? I mean, so from California to Washington D.C., both coasts. Why
Yeah.
why overseas?
Um, I've always enjoyed being overseas. I had the opportunity to study abroad, but never really live overseas. And I was so internationally focused, but primarily because I wanted to do a PhD within the UK system, as opposed to the American system, where they make you do classes and almost kind of get another master's before you they launch you out on your dissertation project. In the UK, your application is your dissertation proposal, and then you immediately go right into your research. So, in an ideal world, the doing the UK PhD is faster, like a 3 or 4 year process. I've It's taken me quite longer to do this, notwithstanding the pandemic. But I was working, teaching at the university, and then did a consultancy with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, um, and that's sort of part and parcel of sort of being an older professional, with a career and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's taken me a little bit longer to wrap up this PhD.
Well, but I think you've been able to use what you've learned thus far in your career in some of your
Oh,
consulting.
sure, sure,
Oh,
sure.
that's
Yeah, I
so it's
mean,
not just been a total
no, 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 no. It's all part of the process. And I've always felt, even if I wasn't at university, that I'm like a lifelong learner. And from being in education and stuff like that, that you know uh, learning is something that you do your whole life. And uh, educating, whether self-educating or educating a higher education,
absolutely.
is a lifelong pursuit.
Absolutely. So being in London, is it dramatically different in the way that business is done, the politics, the economics, the diversity? Is it significantly different from what you experienced when you were in the United States?
I would say it's familiar enough that there's not a big adjustment, but there's sort of around the edges and the subtleties, and just sort of even from the way that people carry themselves. It's interesting because you could sort of say that the way that Americans and British see each other is, they almost approach as opposites and say, well, Americans are like this and British are like this. But in a sense, it's sort of almost, in a sense, kind of just describing a part of them, maybe part of themselves that they don't recognize in them. It's sort of like not a lack of self-awareness, but it's sort of attributing to others what you don't like about yourself or don't recognize in yourself. Like this has to do with sort of the way that you could say that British people are sort of talk around the edges, and they sort of, in some ways don't kind of tell you what they really mean. You kind of have to sort of read into that. But at the other end of the perspective, they can be a lot more sort of in the friendly banter. I would say it is a lot more aggressive and sort of, to an American, it could come off as belittling or sort of teasing too much. But that's sort of how amongst friends, you show your affection by sort of negging the other person or kind of giving them a hard time. But it's because you showing that you're close, because you wouldn't do that to a stranger. It's kind of a culture like, and I sort of different on the subways like that. It's kind of like the classic is that you'd be on the underground on the subway, and you wouldn't like make eye contact or like chat to strangers, whereas an American might just sort of on a bus or on the metro turn to the next person next to you and say, how's it going, and introduce yourself. Whereas like that doesn't really happen in the UK. People are more kind of like, I mean, and again, there's a difference between like London and outside of London. I find that people outside of London are very friendly and want to get to know you, whereas in London, it's kind of like the New York mentality. Like people are very focused on themselves and kind of put blinders on and don't want to, talking to somebody next to them would just kind of waste their valuable time or like prevent them from getting on to the next thing. So
absolutely, that
it's
makes
kind of like
perfect
that.
sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. In the work that you do with international law and international affairs, what is the goal of the work? So is it to create relationships between countries and between entities, or is it to better understand the policies and practices that are used in those areas?
Well, actually, this is actually a pretty interesting day to we're talking. I didn't realize this when we set this up, but so today is the 30th birthday of the bank that I consult with, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So it was created in 1991 in London. So it's always been in London, and it was created because to transition the former Soviet economies from being state-planned, state-owned enterprise into free market economy, encouraging private enterprise, entrepreneurship, and 95% of the bank's investments, it's owned by 64 countries, including the US and the EU. 95% of the bank's funding goes into private sector. So they will invest in small, medium-sized enterprises, looking a lot for companies that are non-performing on their loans and making them profitable, and then returning the profits from their investments into the bank to reinvest in other countries and other bank activities. So the motto of the bank, which I really like, is called they say investing in changing lives, which
Beautiful.
which if you think about sort of the way that commercial banks work and kind of predatory lending and that kind of stuff, or you don't kind of feel like that the big banks, commercial banks, or in the US, whatever, around the world, are sort of looking out for you. They're kind of looking out for the bottom line. Whereas this is a development bank, a multilateral financial institution that really has an ethos, a mission that is inspiring versus, I would say, kind of, something else.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes perfectly good sense. So in the world of high finance and all of that
Yeah.
interesting things, where do you see the biggest problems for people that do not necessarily have access to wealth? Where do you see the places where this needs to be addressed, or we can rethink it?
Well, I think part of it is, I would say, there's 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 definitely an underserved communities, around the world are often places where women are not as involved in the public facing economies as they could be. So in a sense, countries where like 50%, of the population is not seen as uh, a contributor to the wealth, and so I do. One of the things that you do notice about the bank is that like the women leadership. I mean, it's they now have the first president of the bank is a French official, a woman. She's the first woman to lead the bank, and very sort of strong leadership. And this from top to bottom, and this kind of reflects in the way that a lot of the investment you see around the world in the countries where they have the projects is female led, and that's sort of seen as like the the real change makers in these countries are the women, because it's sort of like maybe a sense of, well, the men have always done it this way, and look where that's gotten us. Let's bring in fresh ideas, and often that comes from women.
Absolutely. And is that true in banking in general, or is that just true in banking more internationally? Does banking have a storied history of not having women as leaders, and are they now rethinking that?
Well, so I need to clarify that when we talk about banking, this is quite a different type of banking. It's not commercial banking. It's not a place where like the average person can invest, or this is investment by countries for countries. But there there is there is investment banking at the bank, which is what it is, but it's quite different than the investment banking that you would be used to from like JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs. This is funded by 64 countries for I think about 28 to 30 countries where the bank is currently in relationships from not just the former Soviet states in the Eastern Europe, Central Europe, Central Asia, but also the Middle East, North Africa. So the bank countries operate from Morocco to Mongolia. But I would say, so it's quite different than like commercial investment banking, but it does bring in people who do have that experience, and it's kind of not retraining them, but it's sort of refocusing, harnessing the same skills that you would use in the commercial private sector banking, more for the public good. There are shareholders that you're looking to return an investment, return on investment for the shareholders, but the shareholders are not listed on, it's not listed companies on the New York Stock Exchange. The shareholders are countries, the US, the EU countries, China, Australia. So you're returning the profits to be reinvested elsewhere. So you would say, well, what's in it for the, this is not exploiting the small, medium-sized businesses that that the bank is investing in. It's helping them return profits, so that makes their communities more prosperous, but it also reinvest the profits from those investments within the country or elsewhere the bank operates. So it's a return on investment that I think is beneficial to the global community.
Okay, that makes sense. So where you are, how does diversity manifest itself where you are? So is the area you're in, and I don't know, I think you're in northern London, is that correct?
So actually, I'm just across the east. So I'm just in East London.
East
So
London.
there's within many of your listeners might not know that. So there's the Greater London, which is about 8 to 10 million people, and then within London, there are a couple historic cities within the city. So when you see like Big Ben and the parliaments like that, that's the city of Westminster. So that's where a lot of the government, central government of the UK is in the city of Westminster. And then there's within London, there's the sort of the Wall Street of London is called the City of London. So so within the City of London is where most of the banks and financial institutions are. Some people don't actually live, very few people actually live in the City of London within the London itself, but just on the border of just outside the City of London, within London proper, are some very diverse neighborhoods, including the borough of Tower Hamlets, where I used to live. I've now I moved around the corner a couple months ago. That brought me into a different borough. So now I'm in the borough of Hackney, which is also a diverse borough. But the borough of Tower Hamlets, despite being in central London, had the highest level of they don't call it poverty here; they call it deprivation. So the highest level of deprivation of any of the London boroughs. Wow. So it's it's immigrant families. It's second generation. A lot of South Asian. So like Bangladesh. So part of Tower Hamlets would be called Bengal Town because it's a lot of Bangladeshi immigrants. You've probably heard of Brick Lane, which is really the heart of that area. But this is a lot of places which are they're called council estates. So it's public housing, but finance paid for by London City. So there's a lot of council estates in Tower Hamlets, also in Hackney. So it's, I think, what is it? So the UK is still 92%, I think, in the 90% white, whatever. London itself is quite a bit more diverse, and I would say at least 1/3 of the population here is they have this term which I don't like, but it sort of might be interesting for this discussion. They say, besides white, they say BAME, which is Black, Asian, and minority ethnic. So the BAME, which I don't know if they say BAME, would be about 1/3 of London versus less than 10% of the whole country.
So they loop all those people together in one group under that BAME term.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, and it's interesting because I saw a Washington Post article a couple months ago where it was to African American women who were writing and saying, don't call us women of color, we're Black.
Yeah.
And so there was I guess a movement to sort of differentiate among people of color to say, I don't have the same experiences as this group. So let's sort of dis, uh, not disassociate, but sort of uh, make some distinctions within these communities. But yeah, in the UK, they just want to label it all as BAME,
Yeah.
which is
That
to
that
say non-white, which
I'm right. Right.
yeah.
Absolutely. So with that kind of population, are there conflicts? Are there, do you see some of the kinds of things, we have, white and white crime, we have black on black crime, we have black and white crime, or is there crime like that throughout London, even in these areas that are deprivated versus the ones that are not?
Yeah. So another thing I've sort of noticed is that the police. So you say like 10% of the country is non-white, but within the London Metropolitan Police, I would say the police are even more white than the even less diverse than the country itself.
Wow.
You know, so while we don't have, guns are not legal here, so we don't have uh, police officers don't carry guns unless there's a special there's only like a special unit that's authorized to carry weapons, and that's for
Wow.
like very serious situations. Um, and they have had there was a famous case. There was the London bombings in 2007,
I remember.
the 7/7 bombings, and then there was like a foiled attack. And there was a famous case where they were trying to find someone who was involved in that sort of aborted foil attack, and they were trailing him for a while. The person they thought it was, and then this person attempted to go onto the underground, and they thought this was somebody who had been involved in a failed attack. So they were trailing him. They brought in the firearms officers. He boarded the underground, the tube, the metro, and the firearms officers came on and shot him 7 times in the head. And of course, this person was not in any way involved uh, in the failed terrorist attack. So it's sort of like the archetypal case of sort of police violence or misconduct kind of gone wrong. And the other thing that I should clarify, one difference between the U.S. And the U.K. is that within the U.K. There's we have the same thing as the CIA, which is like the called MI6, and that's like the foreign intelligence. But then also within the UK, there's MI5, which is like the domestic intelligence, which is not exactly equivalent to the FBI, because the FBI is only focused on law enforcement, whereas the MI5 is focused on intelligence gathering. So these are the people that are looking after sort of domestic terrorist plots. So there's much more surveillance. An American would first thing, so one of the people would notice about the UK is you come and London, there's cameras everywhere. So there's much more of like people are much more sort of comfortable with kind of a surveillance
Society.
state, just because they don't have the same. I mean, like I don't know what the size of the London police like compared to like New York City would be, but probably quite a bit less. So they rely more on sort of technologies to be like the eyes and ears. And yeah, so again, they don't carry guns, but just sort of trying this all together, there is sort of within the domestic intelligence, the MI5, there really is kind of like a focus on like profiling And so you tend to get like the profiling of the Middle Eastern or kind of South Asian, like the non-white people are the, you know, it's, it's less now than it was before, but you know, there was kind of like at the height of kind of the Syria Islamic State, there was a bunch of sort of British-born Muslims who would leave and go to Syria. And so I think there was a lot of concern, you know, sort of let's find these people before they radicalize and leave the country. So you don't, because of the lockdown, all these things were kind of a lot less, you know, um, but it is an ongoing concern to sort of, in terms of relations between different groups. Um, I would feel that like British Muslims probably feel that they are um, marginalized or seen as not British. And there was a lot of this sort of really started to happen really after Brexit, you know, like the day after the Brexit vote, like very racist, like white people would go up to people that didn't look like them and say, okay, go home. And they would say, I'm just as British as you. You know, I've lived here my whole life. This is my home. And just because I don't look like you doesn't mean that I'm any less British than you.
Yeah.
Um,
Those
and
all of
yeah,
those things are unfortunate series of
yeah,
events, but it sounds like to me that racism and discrimination rears its ugly head in a lot of instances, and it's not just unique to any particular country or
sure,
ethnic group. It's
sure.
just how things
Yeah.
are. Um, so I have a question. So are you going to stay in London permanently, or are you ever going to come back? Or are you going to move to some other location?
So I'm not sure if we got into this in our first talk, I think last summer. Um, so I'm in the process of I've been here for 5 years, so I can be a resident, a UK resident, but I'm also for my long-term sort of options, keep my options open. I am acquiring and still acquiring uh, Greek citizenship through my grandfather, who was born in Greece before I moved to the U.S. Um, because of the pandemic, that's taken more than a year to get, and then in the middle of that, the Greek authorities decided that I couldn't get my citizenship until my father, born in New Jersey, you know, American Greek, got his citizenship. So he got his citizenship at the end of last year, and then that should sort of clear the way for me to get it. I've uh, There's a lot of bureaucracy and getting the citizenship, getting these documents, going back and forth to the embassies and getting things notarized and that kind of stuff. Um, but I'm nearly there. We've got one more document to go, which is sort of a question of how do I get this? It's kind of a catch 22. And in Greece, they still have mandatory military service for until age 45. You have to have served 1 year in the Greek military. But if you live abroad, they give you the exemption from that. So I've been trying to get this form signed, which certifies by looking at my passport that I haven't spent 6 months of any year in Greece, and then that would make me I wouldn't have to serve in the Greek military once I got the citizenship. If you think about the, you might, I don't know how much of you or your listeners follow the NBA, but there's the the two-time MVP now, Giannis
Yes,
Antetokounmpo.
yes. The
So
Greek, I believe they call him.
yeah, the Greek freak. So he and his brothers had to do like 3 months. Like normally it's like 9 months, but if you live sort of outside or you get the exemption, you have to do 3 months military service. But if you don't, like me, if I got the citizenship, I wouldn't have to do anything because I haven't lived in Greece, even if I got the citizenship. But yeah, so that's the last thing I'm trying to get. But the Greek embassy won't do it. The American embassy said we won't do it. And so it's a question of someone's got to just look at my passport and say, okay, we don't see any long stays in Greece. You know, you're cleared to get your citizenship.
Well, I
Yeah,
hope that,
that's a long way of saying that. You know, like UK citizenship wouldn't help me outside of the UK. So I need to get that EU citizenship so that I could work anywhere in the remaining 27 EU countries.
excellent. I hope that goes well for you.
Thank you.
So we've covered a lot. So I'm going to give the remaining time to you. Is there anything you wish to say or talk about that we haven't talked about?
I've sort of am curious, you know, as an American abroad, you know, I feel like a lot has changed since January with a new administration, obviously still in the pandemic, but I just sort of wonder whether do you feel yourself more sort of optimistic, or sort of do you feel better about the country, better about how things are since November, since January, or do you sort of feel like that the structural kind of problems with the U.S. endure no matter who is the president, and that we're so divided, no matter who's in the White House, it's sort of the work continues, and that it's we might be in a more hopeful place, but not necessarily in a better place, and that there's still a lot of work to do. I'm sort of what your sense of kind of the national mood is. I mean, I can get a sense from how my friends are feeling, but I'm not walking the streets and sort of feeling the mood. And you know, we're wrapping up the murder of George Floyd's, you know, guy on trial, Derek Chauvin, and something like that, and how the country's dealing with that, and then, you know, dealing with different political stuff. But I sort of just want to get your sense of, do you feel like the country's in a better place than we were kind of like, let's say, 6 months ago?
I think the change of administration in the White House was probably helpful for COVID, because we are making real progress with vaccines. We're making real progress with people not dying in quite as large a swaths of people were dying before. And I don't know whether that was a political thing or not. And I don't have any thoughts or comments about that one way or the other. But I think the terms of structural racism and discrimination, it's still here. It's still here. I mean, I don't know how much you pay attention to American news and all stuff, but just this week, you know, weekend, a white police officer, female police officer, shot a young Black man in his car for something. I have no idea why. I think he was missing some kind of license plate or something. I don't know. Something was wrong with his car. And she said she was going for her taser, but she shot him. You know, and I mean, we've had a lot of violence, you know, people you know, doing bad things to Asians. We have a lot of shootings, and, you know, school shootings and locational shootings. You know, the society seems like it's on some kind of, you know, really narrow edge of chaos, that it's moving that way. And you know, when you told the story about the man who was killed on the tube, you know, it's just really unfortunate that these are events that we continually have to live with. And it's not clear to me, is it simply a matter of skin color? Is it a hoodie? What is the thing that makes us feel this vitriol toward each other, that it results in violence? You know, I talk about this so much, I'm almost blue in the face from it, as my mother used to say. The universe lives in harmony. The universe does not have one of anything. It doesn't have one oak tree, one pine tree, one magnolia tree, whatever the tree is, it just have one. It has thousands of them, but they all live together in harmony. And for some reason, man cannot. I mean, we discriminate against each other by race, gender, sexual orientation, height, weight. I mean, you pick the thing and we use it to separate, segregate, and categorize people. Why? You know, you talk about your ethnicity. The fact is that although you might be Grecian, you may be an American, You might be a whole bunch, but you are simply a human being. That's
Yes.
what you are more than anything else. You know, when
Yes.
you stand up in the world, if they were to drop you anywhere in the world, the first thing people wouldn't say, oh, he's from Greece. The first thing people say, that's a guy, that's a
Yeah.
man, you know, or something like that. They might say, well, that's a white man, but you're not defined by these internal and inherent constructs that are part of us, right? So
Yeah.
I did a DNA ancestry DNA
Yeah.
thing, and it was just so shocking to look at my DNA. You know, so when I look at my DNA, so I am, the majority of my blood is from Nigeria.
Okay.
So I don't know whether that's true of all Africans, but the majority of
Yeah.
my blood is Nigerian. But I am part whale, part from Wales. I am
Yeah.
from Greece. I am from Togo. I am from Ireland. All, but if you drop me in the middle of the world, how would you know that? How would
Yeah.
you know what's in my? But all
Yeah.
I am is just a human being. The fact
Yes.
that I'm in this nice facade that describes me for people is
Yeah.
not what I am. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm a Black woman. Yes, I'm a woman, but I am simply a human being. And I just wish we could see each other that way. Because
Yeah.
if you took the time to get to know somebody who you feel diametrically opposed to, you'd be surprised how much you have in common.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking we're talking about sort of when I was asking the question about sort of where is the US right now, there was a lot of talk sort of maybe in the lead up to the election that the US was sort of in like a 1968 sort of, there was a lot of people felt like a lot of similarities between sort of the unrest of the end of the 60s and you know, of course, like 1968, a tumultuous year, was followed by like 1969 and sort of like hippie kind of culture, and it was sort of like a sense of um that things had kind of moved on, or sort of like we're in like a new kind of era. And I sort of felt that yeah, like what I mean, what you said is sort of about, you know, like to kind of put aside the differences, and you say like, well, there's not, you know, there's not different races, there's the human race, and it's like, can people sort of get beyond you know, like outward sort of appearances or sort of identities, and just to see each other as human. And it's something that I think about a lot too in my work, because I've dealt with, you know, different cultures, and I sort of pride myself on and keeping an open mind. You know, there are definitely some horrible people out there, but you feel like most people that you can have at least get to some kind of common ground, and have a dialogue with somebody, even if it's a difficult conversation, um, and you know, you feel like that you aren't kind of, the object is not to get somebody to think the way that you think, because I think that if everyone thought the same way, that would make for, you know, not a very interesting world. But the idea is not to get somebody to think the way you think, but to sort of uh, be able to sort of appreciate that somebody has a different perspective, and then that perspective on its face is not necessarily wrong. I mean, I'm not talking about, you know, hate or racism. That has no place, and you sort of you can't both sides that. But you know, like it's just the kind of this idea of this thing. We're in such a polarized world, and you say like, oh, I have nothing in common with that person on the other side of the political divide. But it's not just politics, and it's not just based on, you know, whether somebody is ultra religious and somebody doesn't have a religion. It doesn't mean that they can't have a common ground or find a dialogue. Uh, it is kind of that, like you said, this everyone is human, and that shared humanity um, that the differences that we have, we you know, we have more in common than we have
In
not in
differences,
common.
right?
And whether you're an American or Brit, or Nigerian, or uh, you know, someone in Syria or Iraq, um, that, you know, we all have these shared values of family, friends, you know, conviviality, eating together, drinking together. And I feel like, you know, in a pandemic world where we've been, this is sort of something that we, you know, once people get vaccinated like that, we want to get back to, because you know, as much as you can connect over the world through Zoom, and being on Zoom kind of calls all day doing your work, and not, you know, being able to do it from home, there is such a sense that of loss of being out in the community, being able to walk the streets, you know, be in rooms together with people that you don't know, and to feel safe, that we've lost in the last, you know, year plus, since the whole lockdown started. And you know, we're not trying to go back to the way things used to be, because, you know, you want to make progress always, but you know, going forward, you know, you wish kind of for a better version of what was before, and that there's things that we don't want to go back to, and, you know, police shootings and all that kind of stuff is something that is just ridiculous, and we need to figure that out,
Yeah,
because it doesn't have to be this way.
yeah,
But at the same time, it's like you would say that because we haven't had like these mass shootings, because people aren't in out, you know, congregating together and something like that. And so you want to, when we emerge from the pandemics and all of the people are out and about and vaccinated, you just kind of, I, I think there's such a sense that a lot of this violence and sort of shootings and stuff like that, um, is based around an idea that, people's, like mental health, is such a like an misunderstood, or sort of under resourced thing, that, you know, a lot of the sort of violence and, you know, domestic versus sort of public facing, is boils down to untreated mental illnesses. And you know, that's one thing, sort of being in Europe, the one thing that sort of that's kind of stands out, is that we do have a, a public health system, you know, a national health care, and that everyone is is entitled to, that healthcare is not a privilege, but it's a right. And you wonder how, you know, there's been obviously steps, Obamacare and that kind of stuff in the US to get healthcare to the people that need it the most. But it doesn't seem like, you know, the single payer that Democrats would want to go for will happen soon, because of the way that the healthcare companies, that healthcare is tied to your job, and if you leave your job, you lose your healthcare. That's just an entrenched system that doesn't exist in Europe, and sort of, I think, that's the thing that Europeans find the most difficult to understand about the U.S. is that how can we have such a private healthcare system that's not portable, and that people stay at their jobs which they hate because they don't want to lose their healthcare, and you know, I saw a friend on Twitter saying, how can I have insurance and yet I have like a normal childbirth and it costs me $6,000, you know, for a routine childbirth, and how I can pay for that because I have a good job, but how does somebody, you know, so elemental, how do we have a system where it sort of feels like exploitative, or like profiting on, you know, something as part of life as childbirth, you know?
Right.
And so it seems like they've got so much to fix in sort of the areas of healthcare and mental health that that's really something that beyond the figuring out the vaccine and getting people vaccinated, that's really going to be kind of the big challenge, I think, going forward.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for chatting with me today. It's been very, very informative as always. I've learned a lot. I've got a new word to add to my vocabulary, BAME.
Okay, thank you, thank you so much, Rochelle. It's always a pleasure. My best to Rochelle and your family, and I wish everyone health, happiness, success, prosperity, and take care.
We wish that for you too, Chris. And please stay in touch with us. Let us know how you're doing. If we can help you in any kind of way, please stay in touch with us and let us know.
Thank you.
And I am crossing my fingers that you're going to get this little document approved in Greece and you're going to get your citizenship.
Yes,
so
thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Chris. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Okay, take care. Take care.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.
And I will send you a link to this as soon as it's done.
Okay, I appreciate it. And yeah, I'll approve it. You can put it up. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.